No one likes talking about death and dying.
People find talking about death and dying difficult, it's sad, it brings into real focus our own mortality.
Including, it seems, the government.
It's evident when you look at our national health strategies and policies, death and dying barely is ever mentioned.
It was mentioned a lot 3 years ago when debate raged over euthanasia, a debate that ended in David Seymour's End of Life Choice Act. But the aged care sector says in legalising assisted dying, the government can't just pass legislation and walk away.
They very well have put money towards it, I understand that, but that's only half the job. You've then decided that everybody else is going to have to figure out how it works.
Assisted dying has about $2.5 million allocated to it over the next 4 years, and another one-off $2.6 million was spent on IT to support the service. Figures on palliative care are fuzzier because a lot of it's been absorbed into the health and hospital system, but the sector cares for around 20,000 patients a year. But now, as part of health service cuts, the government is planning to axe the jobs of the only 2 people in the country who are working on a national strategy for palliative care.
They've actually made a really big difference and have really been quite a voice for the palliative care space. So they're a little bit dumbfounded, the people who have reached out to me as to why this is happening.
I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, for some, palliative care and euthanasia are 2 sides of the same coin. But for those in palliative care, they're not even the same currency. The sector feels under fire, underfunded, under pressure to allow assisted dying in hospices and rest homes, in spite of a law that says they don't have to, and angry that the government's funding spotlight appears to be firmly on hospitals and not their service, a service that could actually free up hospital beds. But the pro-assisted dying side also has grievances. Last week, the Herald detailed the horrific story of a 44-year-old man in Wellington whose family struggled to find a place for him to die because his hospice wouldn't allow euthanasia on site. Last month, another story of a Hamilton man who died on the back of a ute in a farm paddock because his rest home wouldn't allow assisted dying on the premises. And David, the president of the End of Life Choice Society NZ, wrote a commentary in The Listener about complaints of deliberate obstruction by individual practitioners, faith-based care facilities and hospices when it comes to talking about assisted dying, making it difficult for patients to get information. She says it should be possible for palliative care and assisted dying to work cooperatively together.
There is no conflict at all between assisted dying and hospice-level care. There doesn't need to be a conflict. In other parts of the world, there isn't a conflict. The issue of hospice not going into their particular care model for the purpose of assisted dying, we can understand that, and that they don't want to be involved with it. The End of Life Choice Society says, don't be involved in it. Let others do the providing. People are set up in their own individual private rooms. So all the doctor needs to do is knock on the front door, be shown inside, be shown to the patient's room for the first assessment and the second assessment and the administration of the life-ending medication. The other patients wouldn't have a clue what is going on in the next door room.
I guess the staff would, though, wouldn't they? And some of them have a very deep-seated belief that this is not the way to end your life.
Yeah, they would. In that case, what we would recommend to hospice is that they make it really clear before a person comes into the hospice facility that under no circumstances does assisted dying happen here.
Hospices have this a challenge anyway that hospice is a place to go to die. And our view is hospice is a place you go to live until you die. So trying to move past this myth of hospice is a place you go to die is difficult. And if you say, well, hospice is a place you go to and they will end your life, it just adds another layer of complications to the myth.
Hospice NZ CEO Wayne Naylor says no organisation or person is obliged to provide assisted dying services, and this was made clear by David Seymour when drawing up the bill and rejecting a request by Hospice for conscientious objection.
There's a long-held philosophical basis of palliative care, which is hospices provide palliative care in the community, and that is to neither hasten nor postpone death. So essentially what that means is we support the person, their family, whānau, we manage symptoms, we provide, all the social, emotional, spiritual support, but the person is allowed to die naturally. And that is the choice of the vast majority of people in New Zealand. So that's one thing. We don't see actively ending a person's life as something that palliative care does. We do see assisted dying as a separate and legitimate service that people are allowed to access. So again, it comes back to this, it's a profoundly big thing for health professionals in particular who've gone into their profession to help people and save lives, to be involved with purposefully ending a person's life. And I think this is one of the things that I find quite frustrating, is that I'm very happy to respect a person's wish around assisted dying. It's a legal right now. That's fine. But why is it that the people who support assisted dying can't respect the views of people who don't want to be involved in it, or organisations that don't want to be involved? I find that quite challenging. And I guess a lot of the things raised in that short commentary are actually, I would agree with them. People should not come up against a brick wall when they request or ask questions about assisted dying. It's not appropriate. It doesn't meet the requirements under the legislation. It doesn't meet the Code of Rights. So there's a lot of things that we agree on. I've actually talked to Anne about this in the past. And we also agree that we need better resourcing and access to palliative care and hospice care. I think it's like 76% of people who requested assisted dying already had palliative care involved as well. And hospices are moving on, working with the local assisted dying teams, allowing assessments. And this is particularly to do with the hospice as an inpatient unit, and not all of them do. So we allow assessments from external providers in the inpatient units. Currently, though, most hospices are not comfortable with assisted dying taking place in their inpatient unit. Who's to say if that won't change into the future? I can't say. I think a really useful reality check here is that it's a very small number of people. There's a small number of people who choose assisted dying. Almost all of those, 8 out of 10, happen at the person's home, another 10% in hospital. But of the 330-odd, 350-odd people who have an assisted dying, that's quite a small number. We know from a study based on thousands of deaths that people who are in the last day of life, who are actively dying, get moved all the time. They get moved from aged care facilities, from hospital wards, from home, from ED. It's happening all the time. And these people, and in my own experience, having been director of nursing at a large hospice, people arrive and die in the corridor. They die in the ambulance. They arrive in a desperate state of poorly managed symptoms, and their families are distressed because they've been moved when they shouldn't have been. Often it's because where they were was unable to manage their dying, or unwilling to manage their dying, because they don't have the skills and knowledge. So my view is, yes, the issue for people seeking assisted dying and wanting it in an organisation where they currently don't allow it, that's one thing. The fact that this happens daily across the country for hundreds of people every year, they get moved unnecessarily when they're dying, that's what we need to focus on. People in those places need better education and understanding of palliative care, and better support from specialist palliative care, so that no matter where a person is, they can die there.
The palliative care sector, like most parts of health right now, is suffering from shortages, which is leading to big gaps in the quality and availability of care for many parts of the country.
There's an interesting dichotomy there, that assisted dying is fully funded to make sure that it is equitably available for every person who chooses it. And doctors will travel considerable distances to do assessments and to provide assisted dying. That's all fully funded. What doesn't make any sense is why the 89% of people who die a natural death, where palliative care would be of benefit, and last year that was about 34,000 people in comparison to the 350 odd assisted deaths, their access to palliative care relies in the community a great deal on fundraising, our second-hand retail shops, to make up the shortfall in government funding. How is that? That is not equitable. So there's that dichotomy that we sit with for palliative care and for hospices versus assisted dying. It's not, I don't think hospices feel upset or angry, and I certainly don't think that it's a purposeful thing. It's just a way that it's happened, where assisted dying, it has to be equitable. So why can't we make palliative care equitable so everyone who can access that can also get access?
Wayne says a government restructure is compounding difficulties in getting a clear picture of what is funded and where the gaps are.
For the people that I work with in Health New Zealand, this is the fourth restructure, which is a part of the current reset that they've been through in the last 3 years. So it's created within Health New Zealand, I believe, quite a lot of disarray and not a lot of progress as people are continually being moved, people losing jobs, work programs stopping, etc. The current restructure affects the people that I work directly with. There's just 2 people, 1.8 full-time equivalents working in the entirety of Health New Zealand and the Ministry of Health who focus on palliative care in its very broad sense, not just hospice. And the current proposal is to disestablish those roles and just put palliative care sitting under a generic policy advisor in primary care. What's not changing, as we understand it, is the amount of staff who are dedicated to assisted dying within Health New Zealand, recognising that it's a little bit different because they do run and coordinate the National Assisted Dying Service, so they do need staff. But the need for palliative care across the country is much greater than the need for assisted dying or the demand for assisted dying. So we really need at least that 1.8 FTE, probably more, to ensure that everyone who has a life-limiting illness can access quality palliative care from all sorts of providers.
Dr. Lara Hoskins is a palliative care physician and head of Department of Palliative Care at Waikato Hospital.
It is sad that a person anywhere in the country can get a consultation for assisted dying, I think, quickly and easily, but they can't get a palliative care physician. And these are people, if they're accessing it, that have intolerable suffering. And I wish that they could access doctors and nurses with specialist skill in this to help them with that terrible suffering.
Lara says hospital admissions for terminal illnesses are up all over the country as patients struggle to be seen by GPs, face longer waits for scans and experience delays in diagnoses. That means they turn up later with more troubles than they would have had.
Referrals are up significantly, and we've seen an increase in both numbers but also in complexity of patients, and not just the elderly. We've seen increasing need across the spectrum. There's a lot of work going into getting faster treatment for cancer, and that's one of the big priorities. But unfortunately, there are strains as we manage an increasing population, increasing complexity of disease, increasing burden just with ageing population, and also we're managing conditions and people are living longer with them. And for example, my patients with cancer, not all my patients have cancer, but those who do, they can be waiting now for about 2 months to see a medical oncologist to start their chemotherapy from the time of diagnosis. That is not ideal in anyone's mind, and it's heartbreaking for us, for the medical oncologists who are treating them, but we are seeing a health system struggling so much.
There have been huge advances in the quality of treatments in palliative care in the last few years and in the skills and knowledge of specialists. But Lara says that in turn creates its own problems.
This increasing workload is leading to a burnout or a struggle, so that the distress of seeing patients in difficulty is leading clinicians to treat more and more in futile situations. What I'm seeing in recent years is clinicians, both physicians and surgeons, who previously would be able to have a really good conversation with their patients, explain why a particular intervention wouldn't be ideal. They are now treating, often when there are poor returns or futile treatments, because it's easier to just treat than it is to pause and have those conversations and make some hard decisions. It is really tough, but the thing is that they're not seeing that the patient's going to die whatever they do. And so doctors don't know how to let patients die anymore. They can't admit that that's what's happening, and it leads to more distress on both sides.
The end of life choice bill has changed things, she says.
There has been a shift in patients' expectations, and I'm certainly seeing patients who are talking of pursuing assisted dying, not realising what their options are for good symptom management and having good information about treatment choices that they have in terms of declining offers of medical intervention. And it concerns me that there are so many in assisted dying policy roles nationally and so few in palliative care, when that's a much smaller proportion of the population accessing that service.
They didn't sign up for assisting somebody to end their life.
Tracy Martin, former NZ First MP and Minister for Seniors, is now the Chief Executive of the Aged Care Association. She says forcing hospices and aged care facilities to accommodate assisted dying if they don't want to is not a solution.
I think that's the danger. That's the danger if you force people to deliver a service that their basic values, their basic belief structure, it is in direct opposition to. So you deny everybody dignity, not just the person who is ending their life. And that's why it needs more conversation. Forcing people to do it would be a blunt tool. A smarter tool that might take slightly longer is actually entering into conversation, coming up with a system where we map where the provision is and then come up with a solution about how do we make sure it is accessible across the country.
She's overseeing a really tough time for the sector.
I absolutely believe that palliative care is struggling, like residential care, like in-home care, with an ageing population, with more people that are seeking those services, and the funding model is broken. From those in our sector, and I've just come from a palliative care meeting, actually, over here in the Wairarapa. So from those who are either looking after individuals at the end of life, so they have got an illness or a disease or whatever, and so they're in hospice care or being cared for as they are able to predict their death, there's very little funding there. Right, very little funding. The circumstances of many communities is becoming quite dire with regard to access to general, GPs and other medical professionals that are available 24/7 to provide the care that is needed or to provide the medication to those who are actually caring for the person who is dying. With regard to our facilities, so residential care facilities, we're in a conversation right at this moment in time with Te Whatu Ora, trying to negotiate an evidence-based price about what it actually costs in 2025 to provide the level of care that any New Zealander should expect as they are passing away. And that's been a really challenging conversation, and I don't think anybody would need me to explain too hard why.
Have hospices been bearing this burden for too long? I mean, they have the hospice shops, and it's crazy that it's funded that way.
Yeah. Yes, you can't build any part of a health system off the backs of volunteers, right? I mean, hospice has done the most amazing job, and they have held this up for us as a country for so long through, as you say, through all of their volunteer work in the secondhand stores and so on and so forth. But you can't ask volunteers to hold up the medical side of what is death. And unfortunately, we're getting further and further down that track, with asking families and whānau to do more and more of that care themselves. And sometimes we're just in parts of the country, we're not able to provide them with overnight access to overnight skill, or an overnight respite care or things like that, where it is quite dire in parts of the country. And this is natural death. This is not the conversation that, of course, quite a few people are having with regards to somebody who's planning their death because they meet a criteria by which our legislation now allows them to make that decision.
Okay, this seems to be one of the elephants in the room, is that there seems to be a resistance amongst the palliative care / hospice arena to accept assisted dying, to merge those two things, to put them on the same offering, if you like.
Well, they're not the same offering. So I think that's the first thing, right? Most people don't choose to take their own lives. Right? I know what our suicide numbers are, but let's just talk about this in this context. Most people try to live as long as possible and as well as possible. But of course, we have a percentage of New Zealanders now who have a diagnosis, which means that they're now looking at a very painful passing. And the legislation was passed through the House, through the representatives, that said, if you meet that criteria in the legislation, then we will allow you to choose to have a dignified death. That's the way it's articulated. Now, the bit that, of course, is slightly missing at the moment is around conscientious objection. So it's really incumbent on the state here to say, well, the representative house, Parliament, passed legislation saying that this can be done. We need to ensure that we have providers who are able to assist those who fit the criteria and want to make this decision for themselves. But we can't force all of those who, either through charity or personal belief or professional conduct, who have in the past assisted people with a natural death to their passing, we can't force them to provide this other service. So they do need to be treated separately without stigma on either, of course. But the politicians need to put their minds to it and actually set up the operating arm of Health New Zealand to come up with a solution by which there is a workforce ready and able, and they'll be some of the existing providers who we can advertise to those individuals and say, absolutely, come on in, and if you find yourselves in these circumstances, then we will help you. Now, we need to establish what should we be doing and advising our members. Should it be that when a person comes into your residential care facility, if you have a facility with a value structure that says we won't participate in that, you should really tell that individual before they sign into your facility, not wait till there's a possibility they need that service. And that conversation hasn't taken place that I'm aware of.
NZ First MP Tanya Onkovic has a members' bill sitting in the biscuit tin that would give some certainty to the palliative care sector that both hospice and end-of-life choice proponents say they'd support. She says it would create an obligation for the Health Ministry to have a palliative care strategy and introduce accountability on that so that children and adults will have equity and access to services around the country.
Here is one thing that is guaranteed for all of us is we will all face death, and we all have a right to die with dignity. Death is very much a part of life, and actually palliative care is explicitly recognised under the human right to health with the WHO. So palliative care must be just as important as living. The palliative care space is in a way being forgotten here.
She's asked for a meeting with the new Minister of Health on the issue and to talk about the disestablishment of the two roles that the palliative care sector is so upset about. That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and Davina Zimmer. and engineered by William Saunders. Thanks to Wayne Naylor, Tracy Martin, Dr. Lara Hoskins, and David and Tanya Onkovich. I'm Alexia Russell. Ka kite.